All right, welcome to OCD Whisperer Podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I've been following you on Instagram for a little while, and I definitely am just super grateful that you said yes to me interviewing you. And yeah, and typically, what I do is I like to keep things kind of short and sweet and to the point. So I love to talk about all things OCD. And I don't know about you, but I've decided this year to be open with people, and I've shared openly that I have OCD, and it's taking me many years before I realized it's OCD. And I think that's a lot of people's experience.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. And so I think one of the things that gets discussed often, but maybe isn't kind of clarified a bit, is there's this whole topic around values and exposure response prevention for OCD. So I want to ask you if maybe you can share with us kind of what are your thoughts about using values or values-driven exposure response prevention work? Like, what does that even mean? How would you do it? Or
Yeah, that's
in mind?
a great question. Someone actually commented the other day and they said, what even are values? And I was like, whoa, that's a big question. But I think starting at the basis of what values are, they're kind of like what you at your core, think is important to you and how you kind of want to live your life. And so you have this kind of compass that's your values to kind of guide you where you want to go. And so a lot more research and kind of like a big push, I think, recently has been for acceptance and commitment therapy recently, or at least that's how I've experienced it, being a little bit more to the forefront of OCD recovery. And sometimes people really like that in addition to ERP. I think it's really helpful because when you're doing a really hard exposure and you're thinking like, why am I doing this? Or like, what's the value in this? I think it's important to think about, well, what do I want in my life? And how does this exposure get me closer to that? So for example, if you're doing a contamination exposure and you're like, well, in this moment, I don't want to do this. It's dirty, it's scary, it's, not making me feel safe. And so thinking about your values, like I value connection, I value, facing my fears and bravery and humanity. And so I think when you think about what you value and what you care about, you're able to kind of think about that exposure in terms of that value. And so I think that it can be really helpful.
So another example be something like, because actually I'm just thinking of somebody recently I've been working with where it's harm OCD. And so having kids around, and one of the things, of course, the OCD brain is latching onto is, oh my gosh, what if I lose control and do something? And okay, maybe it's not now, but what if I do it, in the future? What if I do it tomorrow? What if it really happens? Obviously, the out talk, right? So I think if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is, like, okay, if I'm going to go do this exposure, let's say, make sure that I'm actually not avoiding a knife, but actually using it, kind of saying, okay, let me anchor myself into, what kind of a mom do I want to be in that example? Like, how do I want to show up for my kids? What role model do I want to be? Those would be the kind of examples of questions to ask yourself to help you get clear on what are those things that actually matter to you so much more than just being stuck in that kind of loop cycle of doubting and uncertainty and constantly trying to answer that, what I call this riddle that's just isn't answerable, and really is a time sucker, versus saying, hey, like, I could go do that again and, lose the rest of my day and really not even be present for my kids. Or I could choose to, feel really uncomfortable and kind of yucky and not kind of like that feeling state, but ultimately know that if I stay with it, I'll get to learn something and come out on the other side.
Spot on. Absolutely. Yes.
Awesome. Are there any other kind of tips you might have or suggestions around using values for ERP, or it's really kind of making sure that you don't make it too complicated, but just really constantly coming back to, like you were saying in the beginning, kind of your core, like, who do I want to be? How do I want to live? And that has to matter to me more my anxiety.
Absolutely. I think considering like what do you really want your life to look like, and being able to see that you have agency in your life. Of course there's systems that are going to play a role in that, and there's going to be barriers and factors, but I think at the root of a lot of this therapy is understanding that you get to have a choice in what you do, even when it doesn't feel like you have a choice of in how you respond. I think there's that moment, and when you build awareness and when you build that ability to pause in between in an obsessive thought, and then put space between that and the compulsive behavior. And so I think there's a lot of hope in that when we realize that it's not just like happening to you, but you can decide a little bit of what you want.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point, because I think for the most part, it does feel really urgent, and it does feel like you don't have control over it. But you're right. When you have enough awareness and training, you learn that you can just slow down just enough where you can choose something else. And of course, with practice and time, like anything, you get to master it, like any skill, any habit. Awesome. Okay, so then I have my second and last question, which is, so like you said, there's some people who will say, what are values? Like, what does that mean? How do you find that out? So I want to ask you, do you have maybe an exercise or a tip or a strategy or something you can give us if somebody wanted to uncover their values? How would they go about doing that?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to identify values is to look up, like, there should be lists online. I can try and find one, and we can link it in the notes. But I've just a list of bunches of different values, and Circle, my therapist had me go through a list of maybe 60 or 50 or something values. And so circle first, like all the ones that resonate with you, like go through as many as you want, and then narrow it down to maybe 10, and then order them in terms of which values are most important to you and which are maybe less important, but still important to you. So that has been really helpful for me to kind of have a list of my 10 top values that I can move towards. I think one of them was bravery and compassion. And I think those really tie in well to OCD recovery and that lifelong process of fighting, or not fighting, but, kind of challenging, I'll say, intrusive thoughts and everything.
Awesome. And you kind of already gave a couple examples. That's what I was going to ask. Can you give us like maybe 5 examples of some, like 5 different values, just so people can kind of hear it and start to maybe get some ideas on their own? So you mentioned bravery was one.
Yes. Empathy. Mm-hmm. Let's see. Someone can value timeliness. That's, a value. I think sometimes we get caught up in like good values and bad values, but there's a lot of things you can value: wellness, or taking care of yourself or taking care of others, kindness, helpfulness, things like that. So
yeah, like independence, freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, awesome, great. Yeah, I just wanted, because I think sometimes if we can hear some examples, it might get people's brains warmed up, and they can be like, oh yeah, wait a minute, yeah, those things are important to me. Or yeah, wait a minute, this other thing is important to me, like connection, right? Like having a meaningful conversation, or being really present and there for my loved ones, or something like that, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mimi. I appreciate your time. And I wanted to ask you, how can people find you if they would love to connect with you?
Yes. So I'm on Instagram at the.lovelybecoming. I also just started my own podcast as well called The Lovely Becoming. And I'm trying to think, I'm trying Facebook a little bit, but it's also the.lovelybecoming. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. I will make sure to include your Instagram and your podcast. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming on and answering some of these questions.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.